There is a darkness that tries to erase names, faces, and stories, a systemic, calculated darkness that feeds on silence and fear. It builds walls, not only of bricks and barbed wire, but also of souls, separating humanity from itself. Within this manufactured night, most lights go out, one by one, surrendering to the overwhelming force of despair. But some, just a few, insist on shining with a defiant, almost incomprehensible intensity. What would it take to look this evil in the eye, not with hatred, but with an understanding so profound it becomes a weapon? How can one study the anatomy of tyranny, the sick psychology of a regime, and use that knowledge not to destroy but to save? This is the story of a woman who did just that, who transformed the logic of oppression into a tool of liberation, proving that the most powerful resistance can arise from the quietest, most astute observation of the human heart. It makes us wonder, what would we do, faced with the moral collapse of our world? Would we bow our heads, accepting the new and terrifying normal, or would we find within ourselves a courage we never knew we possessed? The journey we will take today is not just about a daring rescue amid the chaos of World War II. It is a delve into the mind of a heroine who understood her enemy better than they understood themselves, and who, armed with this wisdom, waged a private war for the soul of humanity. The historic promise that pulses at the heart of this narrative is that a single individual, driven by unwavering compassion, can subvert the most powerful death machine ever conceived. The journey of Irena Sendler, the Polish woman at the heart of this hurricane, validates the painful truth that hope is not a passive feeling, but an action that demands strategy, sacrifice, and a visceral refusal to accept the unacceptable, even when the entire world around has surrendered. Imagine Warsaw in 1940. The air is heavy, gray with the dust of bombed-out buildings and thick with palpable fear. The Warsaw Ghetto has been sealed off, becoming an island of hunger and despair, a slow antechamber to death for nearly 500,000 souls. To the outside world, it was a no-go zone, a problem to be ignored. For Irena, a social worker, it was a calling, a moral duty that screamed louder than any Nazi decree or any instinct for self-preservation. She didn't see numbers or statistics. Where the regime saw a mass to be eradicated, she saw the eyes of a child. Each life was an entire universe. And in her mind, the cold, bureaucratic logic of the oppressors began to reveal itself not as an impenetrable fortress, but as a system full of cracks, arrogance, and blind spots. She realized that the Nazi obsession with order, documentation, and a pathological fear of disease could be the key to her disobedience. Irena's journey of overcoming was forged in this fire. Her pain wasn't just the sight of indescribable suffering, but the weight of each decision. Choosing who could be saved today, knowing that many others wouldn't have the same chance tomorrow. It was a burden that would crush most, but for her, it became fuel. Her validation didn't come from medals or recognition, but from the silence of a sleeping child in the back of an ambulance, from the warmth of a small hand holding hers as she passed through a checkpoint. She was like a weaver operating in the shadows, using the threads of the enemy's own web to create a tapestry of salvation. German bureaucracy designed to categorize and condemn was transformed by her into a maze of false permits and forged documents. Propaganda dehumanizing Jews was used as a disguise, allowing her to enter and leave the ghetto under the guise of sanitary control, a task the soldiers themselves dreaded. Pain was her constant companion. The pain of seeing families fall apart, of mothers handing over their children to a stranger with only a fragile promise of safety. It was the pain of carrying the secret of 1,000 identities, a weight that isolated her even among her closest allies. And yet, she persisted, transforming this agony into armor of determination. Each life saved a small act of revenge against the apathy of the universe. Her story is proof that history's greatest battles are not fought solely with tanks and armies, but also on the battlefield of human psychology. She waged a war of intelligence and empathy against a regime of brute force and hatred. And in doing so, she not only rescued bodies from physical extermination, but also rescued the very idea of humanity from a moral abyss, showing that the light of compassion can indeed find a way through the densest darkness. Irena's past as a social worker prepared her for this fight in a way no military training could. She already knew the streets of Warsaw, the alleys, the basements, the secret passages of the city, but more importantly, she knew the people. She understood the language of fear, the grammar of loss. She knew how to speak to a grieving mother, how to calm a terrified child, how to inspire confidence at a time when trust was the rarest and most dangerous currency in the world. Her delve into the profound challenge began with small acts, smuggling food, medicine, messages. But she soon realized that this was not enough. It was like trying to empty the ocean with a thimble. The final solution was underway, and the only real answer was to remove the children from that hell. She then organized a network, Jagoda, a Jewish aid council, transforming her individual compassion into a highly organized and dangerously effective clandestine operation. The rescue scenes were a study in terror and courage. A small child was sedated and placed inside a coffin, carried out like a victim of typhus, a disease the Nazi guards feared more than insubordination. Others were hidden in potato sacks, in toolboxes with false bottoms, or taught to blend in with groups of workers leaving the ghetto. A baby's cries were drowned out by the barking of a dog she had trained to bark on command whenever they passed the guards. The sensory storytelling of this era is overwhelming. The fetid smell of the sewers, which became escape routes, the absolute darkness broken only by a guide's dim flashlight, the biting cold of the metal of an ambulance stretcher where a child hid, the sound of a heart beating wildly in one's ears, drowning out the sound of German soldiers' boots marching just meters away. Each rescue was a miracle born of meticulous planning and desperate luck. Supporting figures were the backbone of their operation. They were the ambulance drivers who risked immediate execution if discovered. They were the Polish families who opened their doors to shelter Jewish children, knowing that betrayal would mean a death sentence for their entire family. They were the priests who issued false baptismal certificates, giving these children a new identity, a paper shield against persecution. Irena wasn't alone, and that's a crucial part of her story. She was the architect, the strategist, but her network was made up of dozens of ordinary people who became extraordinary through their choices. They were neighbors, friends, colleagues, a web of mutual trust woven in the dark, united by a common purpose. They were proof that resistance doesn't have to be a solitary act. It can be a symphony of small acts of courage. Her family, though not directly involved in every dangerous detail, was her emotional anchor. The knowledge of what she was doing weighed heavily on them, a constant fear looming over their lives. Yet their silent support, their understanding gaze, the warm meal waiting for her after a night of terror, all of this gave her the strength to carry on. They were her safe haven in a world that had become a sea of madness. The culmination of her defiance came in October 1943. The Gestapo, the Nazi secret police, finally caught up with her. They raided her apartment in the middle of the night. In that moment of absolute terror, she managed to hand over to a friend the coded list with the children's names and new identities, her most precious possession. The loss of that list would mean the loss of history and the hope of reunion for thousands of families. She was taken to the infamous Powiat prison, a place from which few emerged alive. There, she was brutally tortured. Her feet and legs were broken. They wanted names, addresses, the structure of her network. But Irena, even with her body broken, kept her spirit intact. She endured the indescribable pain, revealing nothing. She understood the psychology of her torturers. They hoped the pain would break her will, but they didn't understand that her will was fueled by something they couldn't touch, the love for those children. Sentenced to death by a firing squad, her fate seemed sealed. However, her friends in Jagoda had not abandoned her. On the day of her execution, they managed to bribe a German guard. On the way to the execution site, she was left behind on a deserted street. Officially, according to the records, she was dead, executed. But Irena Sendler was alive, hidden, but still fighting, a ghost who would continue her work in the shadows until the end of the war. This human support, this unwavering loyalty of her network was what saved her. It shows that even in the darkest environment, the bonds of solidarity can be stronger than the chains of tyranny. Her survival was not just hers, but a victory for the entire community of brave souls who refused to let the darkness prevail. They proved that mutual support is the most powerful form of resistance. Her journey forces us to look inward. Our world, though different, also has its own forms of darkness, its own injustices that demand we take a stand. Perhaps not on such an epic scale, but in the small, everyday moments, in the choices we make when no one is looking. It is in these moments that our character is truly revealed. Think for a moment. When was the last time you felt a deep compulsion to do the right thing, even if it was difficult, even if there was a cost? It might have been standing up for a colleague, helping a stranger, speaking out against a small injustice. This moment, however small it may seem, connects you directly to Irena's spirit. It's the same spark of human decency that refuses to be extinguished. We created this space to explore these stories, not as dusty relics of the past, but as mirrors to our own humanity. When we share our experiences, we create a current of empathy. We realize we are not alone in our search for meaning and courage. Our individual stories come together to form a collective narrative of resistance and hope, much like the network Irena built. I want to invite you to join this movement. Leave a comment below and share your story if you feel comfortable. It doesn't have to be a great heroic act. Just a moment when you chose compassion over indifference. And so we can find and recognize each other. Begin your comment with the key phrase, "The light persists in the darkness." Let's transform this comment section into a mosaic of hope. Your story matters. Every act of kindness, no matter how anonymous, sends ripples through the world. By sharing, you not only honor the memory of heroes like Irena Sendler, but also shine a small light for others to see in their own moments of doubt. You become part of a community that believes history is shaped by ordinary people making extraordinary choices. Irena's first tool of transformation was audacity. It wasn't blind or reckless courage, but a calculated audacity based on her understanding of the Nazi mentality. She knew the regime was built on a foundation of arrogance. They saw themselves as a superior race and chronically underestimated their enemies, especially a woman, a mere social worker. Her audacity exploited this arrogance. She didn't hide in the shadows all the time. On the contrary, many of her most daring actions took place in broad daylight under the guards' noses. Driving an ambulance in and out of the ghetto, sirens blaring, wasn't the act of someone hiding. It was the act of someone claiming an authority she didn't possess, projecting a confidence that disarmed suspicion. Her audacity created an alternate reality where her actions seemed legitimate. Consider the psychology behind this. Compliance was expected. Disobedience was punishable by death. But disobedience on such a blatant scale, disguised as official activity, confused the guards' bureaucratic minds. They were trained to look for sneaks, for secret activities. They were unprepared for a woman who confronted them with documents and a clipboard, acting as if she had every right to be there. Practical examples of her audacity were daily. She argued with the guards at the gates, complaining about the slowness of the procedures, feigning impatience and authority. She used official jargon and the correct forms, even if falsified, exploiting the system's reverence for paperwork. Her audacity was not about physical strength, but about the power of her performance. A performance so convincing that it turned her captors into pawns in their own game. Her second tool, intrinsically linked to the first, was deception. Irena was a master of illusion, not for personal gain, but as a weapon of war. She understood that in a world ruled by a monstrous lie, the only way to protect the truth was through a veil of smaller, more clever lies. Every life she saved was shrouded in carefully constructed layers of deception. The deception began with identity. A Jewish child became on paper a Polish Catholic orphan. Names were changed, life stories were invented, documents were forged with impeccable precision. Irena and her network weren't just smuggling children. They were creating new people, with fabricated paths that could withstand superficial scrutiny. It was a real-life theater where the script was survival. The practical application of deception was vast and creative. She used boxes with false bottoms, but also emotional disguises. She taught older children to recite Catholic prayers so they could pass interrogations. She used the city itself as a stage, moving children between convents, orphanages, and family homes, each location a new scene in an elaborate play to deceive the omnipresent authorities. Her greatest disappointment, perhaps, was her own persona. To the Germans, she was a health department employee, doing her job. To her neighbors, a quiet woman. Few knew the true scale of her operations. This ability to compartmentalize her life, to wear different masks for different audiences, was essential. Deception was her armor, protecting not only herself, but the entire fragile ecosystem of salvation she had built. The third and perhaps most moving tool of transformation was preservation. Irena wasn't satisfied with simply saving lives. She was determined to save identities. She knew that surviving the war was only half the battle. The other half was a child's ability to know who they were, where they came from, the name their parents gave them. Erasing a person's name was the final step in genocide, and she refused to allow it. This impulse led her to her most iconic act. For each child she rescued, she wrote down their real names and their new assumed names on thin strips of tissue paper. These fragile lists, holding the key to the past of thousands of children, were the lifeblood of her operation. They were the promise that memories would not be destroyed, that families could one day be reunited. To protect these lists, she placed them in glass jars. And then, in an act of defiant hope, she buried these jars beneath an apple tree in a friend's garden, a secret kept in the earth. The tree became a silent guardian of the identities of 2,500 children, a living archive waiting for the day when the truth could finally be unearthed along with the jars. Preservation was an act of faith in the future. It was believing that there would be an afterward, a time when names would matter again, when families could be healed. While audacity and deception were tools for the present, for immediate survival, preservation was their gift for tomorrow. It was their final refusal to let darkness have the last word, ensuring that the roots of each life saved remained intact. The vision of the new reality after the war was a mosaic of joy and pain. Warsaw lay in ruins, a ghost town, but beneath the rubble, life stubbornly returned. For Irena, peace brought a new and monumental task: to unearth the pots and begin the painful process of finding the children and, if possible, their families. The war was over, but her mission was far from over. The sensory impact of that time was bittersweet. The sound of reconstruction replaced the sound of bombs. The smell of dust and mold was slowly overtaken by the scent of fresh bread. For the children she saved, it was a new and confusing world. Many were too young to remember their original families. Their adopted parents were the only parents they knew. The new reality was a complex web of identities and loyalties. Irena and her surviving collaborators worked tirelessly, cross-referencing the jar lists with survivor records. Each successful reunion was a miracle, a moment of pure joy that justified all the suffering and risk. A mother who survived a concentration camp discovering her son was alive. A father returning from exile to find the daughter he thought he'd lost forever. But the most common reality was loss. The vast majority of the parents of the rescued children had been murdered in Treblinka and other extermination camps. The names on the jars were often the only traces left of entire families that had been wiped from the face of the earth. For these children, the new reality was orphanhood, and the discovery of their Jewish identity was sometimes a painful burden in a world still marked by anti-Semitism. The impact of Irena's actions unfolded over decades, like ripples from a stone thrown into a pond. The 10,000 lives her network touched, directly or indirectly, became seeds. These children grew up, married, and had children and grandchildren of their own. They became doctors, artists, teachers, and parents. Each of them carried within them the spark of a life that was nearly extinguished. The sense of historic change she brought wasn't that of a grand military victory, but something more subtle and profound. It was the reaffirmation that a civilization's worth isn't measured by its ability to build empires, but by its willingness to protect the most vulnerable. Her legacy is a forest of lives that exists today because one woman and her friends decided to plant a garden in the midst of hell. She lived to see the impact of her work, even though for decades her story was suppressed by the communist regime in Poland. Only in her old age did she begin to receive the recognition she deserved. But for her, true recognition wasn't in the awards. It was in the letters she received, in the photos of smiling families, in the faces of the descendants of those she had saved. Life after the transformation was proof to the world that history is not just a succession of kings and battles. It is a tapestry woven with threads of individual courage. The new reality Irena helped create is our own world, a world immeasurably richer for the lives she saved and the generations that followed. She showed us that victory over evil isn't always noisy. Sometimes it's the sound of a name being whispered back into existence. Sometimes it's the silence of a glass jar being unearthed, bringing to light not treasures but something infinitely more precious. The promise of a future that was nearly stolen. Her story is a beacon that illuminates our own capacity to create change. She doesn't ask us to replicate her heroic deeds, but to embrace her spirit. The spirit of seeing the humanity in others, of acting with compassion, and of refusing to be a passive bystander in the face of injustice. This is the new reality she invites us to build every day. Irena Sendler's story is not just a tale of the past. It is an invitation to take refuge in the power of compassion and the courage of the human spirit. Stories like hers remind us of what we are capable of, both for evil and, more importantly, for good. They offer us a safe haven in times of uncertainty, a place where we can recharge our faith in humanity. Our channel is built to be that refuge. It's a space dedicated to finding and sharing these powerful narratives, to honoring the memories of those who fought to keep the light burning in history's darkest moments. We're not here just to tell stories, but to connect with the soul of history, with the emotions and choices that define who we are today. When you subscribe to this channel, you do more than just click a button. You join a community of people who believe that history has the power to teach us, inspire us, and unite us. You become a guardian of these memories, ensuring that the legacy of heroes like Irena Sendler is never forgotten and continues to inspire future generations. So, if you felt a connection to this journey, if you believe these stories need to be told, I invite you to become part of our community. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and join us in our mission to keep the flame of history alive. For by understanding our past, we find the wisdom and strength to build a better future. Welcome to our refuge.